Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Bull City Coordinators Duke Football Coverage Podcast. Follow us on our website, bullcitycoordinators.com. Check us out on Twitter at DukeFB Coverage. Send us an email, bullcitycoordinators@gmail.com, and listen to us anywhere you get your podcasts. Our next guest is going to get us ready for Duke's final regular season opponent. Our next guest covers said opponent, the Pittsburgh. I don't really want to name them because they just have flat out owned the Blue Devils. So I'm trying to think about how much of an introduction to give. The football gods have cursed us. You know it. I mean, I just don't know if we're allowed to beat Pitt. So I'll just say this. Our next guest is a Pitt athletics reporter for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I think we're going to start drinking every time I say Pittsburgh or Pitt here pretty soon, the way this is going. You can follow him on Twitter at _Noah Hiles. Noah Hiles, how are you, sir?
I'm fantastic. Thanks for having me on the show, Ben.
Hey, glad to do it, and thank you for agreeing to do this so early. Unlike probably most people, I got to schedule these things pretty far in advance because of my trial calendar. Why don't we just get right into this? Pitt and Duke are not really in the same position right now, although I think most everybody for both teams, looking at both teams, would agree this is not really the way maybe we thought the season would go, especially for the Blue Devils after the way the season started. But tell us kind of where Pitt is right now as a team, and don't put anything in the vase, if you will.
Oh, as you can see, I got the blue vase right behind me here. But it's been a disaster of a season, to put it lightly. I mean, this is a program, as I'm sure you're aware, that 7 to 8 wins is the standard at minimum, especially in recent years when they had a guy named Kenny Pickett at quarterback. I mean, Pitt won a lot of football games with him. And then last year, even without Pickett, it managed to win 9 games and go to the Sun Bowl and finish ranked. And that's kind of been the standard under Pat Narduzzi, is 8 wins or more. And that was the expectation coming into this year. This team returned none of its stars, but a lot of key pieces. It had a lot of seniors. And the expectation was that the guys that you're plugging in were going to be able to pick up the slack, and it was just going to keep on moving. And that hasn't been the case. A large part of the struggle has been because of the offense. I mean, the guy who started the first 5 games of the season at quarterback is now a tight end. If that's not an indication as to how poorly things have gone for Pitt's offense, I don't know what is. But, Phil Dracovic was a guy that had a decent career at Boston College, I guess, a Pittsburgh native, a star recruit out of this area. And Panther fans were excited to have him back. And his familiarity with Frank Signetti's offense, having worked with him at Boston College, gave some people, myself included, reason to believe that he could come in and be a game manager. And if that's all he was, the run game would be good enough and the defense would be good enough for this team to win 8-9 games again. But the reality was none of those things were good. Dracovic was bad. So bad that he got benched during the bye week. And like I said, the guy's now practicing tight end and plays on special teams. The offensive line's been bad. They're all ACC. Left tackle Matt Gonsalves in the preseason ended his season 3 weeks in. He's out for the year and probably will never play another game at Pitt again. Ryan Jacoby, the starting left guard in the preseason, tore his ACL. Jake Cradle, the starting center for Pitt, a 6th-year senior, played over 50 games in his career at Pitt. He missed time this season. They've had, I think, 9 different offensive line combinations this season. So they've been banged up front. The run game hasn't been good. Quarterback play has been atrocious. And the defense has been good, just not what it typically is for a Pat Narduzzi defense. There's no Kalijah Cansey on this team, or at least not yet. I think they do have some young guys who are going to end up being stars, but they're just not there yet. And when you lose him, when you lose Servassier Dennis at middle linebacker, when you lose 2 safeties that are now in the NFL, it's tough to replace all of that when you're a program like Pitt that's recruiting a couple of 4 stars and a lot of 3 stars. You need time to develop these guys. And a rebuilding year happened to coincide with the worst offensive season this program's seen in decades. And that's how you get to, what are they now? 3-8.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
Obviously, with excuse me, we've got, in addition to having a little bit of a cold, we have some lovely brush fires that have broken out in a nearby county. So the air quality, the wind shifted and it came down this way. So I'm feeling some effects of it today. So if I start coughing a lot, I apologize.
No worries.
But let's look at a little bit more detail about what's been going on with Pitt. And here's kind of what I can't figure out, to your point, is, and a lot of Duke guys hate Narduzzi. Fine. The thing that I was always impressed with about his results is how consistent he has been. And this season just seems so far away from what you would expect from an Narduzzi team. And even 2022, you lose Kenny Pickett, who's a program generational quarterback, not a guy you have very often.
Right.
They went 9-4, won the Sun Bowl, and finished ranked 22. So I'm thinking coming into this season, not that I was too high on Jurkovec because I saw him play against Virginia Tech last year, and I didn't think he was. Maybe it was just a bad. I don't know. I just was not that thrilled with him as a quarterback. But I thought, okay, well, Narduzzi will find a way to have this team be really competitive. And you've mentioned a lot of the injuries. Never good to have an O-line hurt, but a lot of these losses have not even really been ones that you could look at and say, okay, we're close. A couple of things here, a couple of things there, we could turn it around. What is the mood amongst the Pitt fans, the Pitt faithful, if you will, right now?
Oh, they're all frustrated because I think it's fair to say this team should be a lot better than 3-8. If you just look at the talent across the board, this is a more talented team than Boston College. This is a more talented team than Wake Forest. This is a more talented team than maybe even Virginia Tech or a lot of these teams that are in the middle of the ACC standings that are bowl eligible. Pitt should be there. And there are certain games that you look at that Pitt lost this season. You look at the week 2 loss to Cincinnati, where there were so many winnable opportunities there and just nothing happened. You look at the West Virginia game where Pitt held WVU to 212 yards of total offense and did not win. That's crazy. You got to win that football game. Wake Forest, I think Pitt had over 400 yards as an offense in that game, and it lost 21-17. How does that happen? Those are 3 games right there where if Pitt wins those, and they should have won all 3, you're looking at a different team. You're looking at a 6-5 team that, sure, it's disappointing for recent standards, but it's still a much more tolerable down year than what it's going on. I actually asked Pat about this recent win they had over Boston College, because if you look at that win, you talk about consistency with Pat Narduzzi. Typically, if you take the 2021 year out of the equation where they were just scoring a million points and no one could stop them, typically a Pat Narduzzi team wins by running the football, playing very strong defense, by forcing turnovers, and not turning over the football. And that's exactly what it did against Boston College. That is the blueprint on how he's built his program into winning, I believe, 65 games in his time here in 9 years. That's how he does it. And so I asked him this morning, I said, is there any element of frustration that comes from watching that tape against Boston College, knowing that you guys probably should have beat other teams like that? Here's his exact quote. He said, I think everybody in this room will look back after the year and say, what if? What if it got figured out earlier? That's frustrating. Again, we say the same thing as coaches. Why couldn't we do that before? Why didn't we as coaches and players do that before? How come it took us so long to figure out that this is the recipe for success? Yeah, you're always going to have regrets as a coach, and you're going to look back, and you can't look back and get mad and frustrated this week. But it's like you're going to look back, and in another month, we'll be looking at ourselves like, why aren't we still playing? Why aren't we playing sometime at the end of December? And that'll be frustrating. So that's, I think, how Narduzzi's feeling. That's how his team's feeling. And that's how the fans are feeling, because this team should not be 3-8, but it is. And it's just been one of those years.
Well, a couple of things that I want to ask you about. You said how long to figure out. I'm not sure, though, if beating Boston College after losing to Syracuse, which just dismissed its head coach,
Yeah.
you lost by 15. I don't know if that's necessarily figuring it out, or if
Right.
anybody's going to say, yeah, you figured it out. Uh, but you mentioned the 2021 season, and when they were just looking fantastic. They had a really good offensive game plan and a really good offensive coordinator. And what happened there? Why is that guy not there? I mean, I've seen disgruntled grumblings online, and you don't know what the truth is behind that. But you're a beat reporter. I mean, you had that quote out there about Narduzzi saying basically, "I didn't bring in good enough guys. Sorry." You know, you're close to the program. What happened? I mean, why did they go so far away from that?
I think simply put, Pat wanted an offense that ran the ball more. He's a Big Ten guy. He's a Midwest guy. He's from Youngstown. He has a brand of football that he likes. He wants his defense to play fast and aggressive. And when you have a defense like that matched with a high tempo offense that's scoring a lot of points quickly, it puts your defense, it makes it hard to be as aggressive on defense. You're going to be out. He wants a time of possession type offense. And I don't have the direct quote in front of me, but he said something along the line. I remember after they won the ACC championship, he talked about how he was frustrated that Wake Forest was, I think, 117th against the run that year in the country, and they weren't running the ball against Wake Forest. Not to mention, what happened when they threw the ball. It ended up, winning them an ACC championship. But that didn't matter. He was mad that they weren't running the ball enough. So that resulted in Mark Whipple's departure. Another very big key piece of that offensive staff that people outside of Pittsburgh probably don't recognize was the receivers coach at the time, Brendan Marion. Go ahead and look up what Brendan Marion's up to right now. He's the offensive coordinator at UNLV, running one of the country's best offenses. And he's a guy that's either going to get a huge OC job this offseason or a head coaching position. So you look at it, that offensive, that year where they had a Heisman finalist at quarterback, a Bolitnikoff winner at wide receiver, their starting running back is now on the New York Jets. They had a couple of NFL guys on the O-line. They had all this talent. They had all these good coaching minds too. I mean, Mark Whipple left for Nebraska. Obviously that didn't work out, but that's a heck of an opportunity to get. And yeah, that's not his fault really. And Brennan,
that's what
Brennan
happens when you leave the Big 12 and can't recruit Texas anymore. I mean,
right.
it's just,
yeah. So long story short, it's kind of Pat's doing that. He won his championship and he was happy to win, but it didn't seem like he liked the offense schematically. And he brought in Cignetti to have a little bit more of a balanced offensive attack. Cignetti was a guy who was at Pitt earlier in his career. And when he was here the first time, Pitt was running the ball well. It had Dion Lewis and Ray Graham, and it was running all over teams in the Big East. And then he left and had 10 different other jobs and comes back to Pittsburgh. And in his first year, Pitt had a great rushing attack. Could that have been maybe because it had an All-American running back? It looks like that's why, yes. But when it turns out, when you can't run the ball, you should probably still have a little bit of ability to pass. And when you can't throw the football and you don't have an All-American to bail you out on the ground, you're in trouble. And that's kind of what happened here.
One thing that you mentioned was Narduzzi's a time of possession guy. And, one thing that my dad and I have talked about of late with the Blue Devils as we have our Sunday recap or post-mortem, depending on what happens with the game. One thing he says is, well, we won time of possession. We won time of possession. Time of possession is a meaningless stat. I've seen the Blue Devils win time of possession plenty of times and still lose the game. I just don't see what the emphasis on that is. unless maybe you're running like a wishbone or something like that, triple option. What's the reasoning maybe behind that? Is it just a ball control, complementary football kind of a deal?
I think for Pitt's scheme specifically, you want to win time of possession because Narduzzi wants his defense to play fresh and fast. This is a team that blitzes a lot. It's a team that plays man coverage pretty much every play, cover one, cover zero. And so if you're going 3-and-out a lot, or even if you're scoring quickly and the other team's on the field more, your defense isn't going to be able to play as fast. It's not going to be able to play as aggressive. So I think that that's the key there. And if you look, I mean, they allowed a lot of points in 2021. And I think it was because they're moving quickly. You think of college football as a landscape. Which conference is notorious for having the highest scoring teams? The Big 12. That conference is also notorious for having the worst defenses. Those two things kind of go hand in hand. You look at the conference that's known for the best defense. You look at the Big Ten or the SEC, specifically the Big Ten. It's a lot more running. It's a lot more time of possession. Time of possession helps your defense more than anything else. Now, if you have a bad defense, it's not going to matter at the end of the day. But if you have a defense that's aggressive and can make plays, time of possession is everything. So I think that's in certain schemes, it is valuable.
Okay, I think that makes sense. And I see where you're coming from with that. The only thing I guess you could probably show Narduzzi, and I'm not trying to dog him here, although I know the fans from who I follow on Twitter are really frustrated with the offense. You probably could say, remember in 2021 when we had that really good season? I mean, maybe you should tweak it and go a little bit more to the
I mean,
right?
I can't agree more. I don't understand. Like every coach has their preference, right? But at the same time, there's got to come a point where maybe you just say, hey, this isn't how I thought about it working, but it seems to work. Like, remember that year when you had one of the best college quarterbacks in the country and he won you your only championship? And, if it was an extended playoff format, you would have been in the playoff. Remember that? Like, why not try to replicate that rather than trying to be a Big Ten team? And that seems to be the disconnect now. I'm really intrigued to see. Clearly, there are going to be a ton of coaching changes this offseason. And I'm really interested to see the direction that it goes, because we were just talking about this, my beat partner, Chris Carter, and I, on our mailbag, which we record every Monday and it runs on Tuesdays. And we were just saying, what direction could they go? And we're listing off offensive coordinators who are younger, who are all about a passing attack and quick tempo and kind of what you want and need in today's era of college football. Stuff that's going to make skilled players want to come play for you and not just defensive players and linemen and a couple of running backs. But we both kind of had to stop and say, like, these are great fits, but is it what the guy wants? And that'll be interesting because, you look at other coaches like Nick Saban won championships one way with Greg McElroy and who's the other guy? AJ McCarron with a great offensive line and a great defense and just keeping it simple, old school football. And then he switched it up and said, hey, what if I just went out and got the best quarterback in the country and all the best wideouts and scored 55 points a game? And now he's kind of back to doing it the other way. But you need to adapt or at least be able to go with the flow. And the hesitancy to do so on Pitt's end, Narduzzi's end, I think has led to some problems for this program this year.
Well, and you see that a lot in college sports when guys get too wedded to their way of doing things. The prior regime in Durham, Cutcliffe was the best example of that. Quick 3-and-outs. He wouldn't slow anything down. He wouldn't do what Coach Johns has done real well with the offense, which is we're going to go to a spread and we're going to hurry up to get to the line, but then we're going to stop. And we're not going to snap the ball immediately. We're going to wait. We're going to get a good read, slow things down a little bit. Of late, though, there have been and we can talk about this maybe a little bit more as we get into how they'll match up. There has been some stubbornness that I don't understand. Primarily, you're 3rd and 1, 3rd and short, whatever, and you go in the gun. I don't get that. Instead of putting people under center or doing something different, you've seen that a lot of late, which is part of the reason the Blue Devils are at 6-5 right now, and maybe not at 7-4 or 8-3. Injuries have a lot to do with that. You mentioned that for Pitt. One thing that I want to ask you about, though, before we turn to the matchup itself, I was looking over the schedule, and you mentioned some of the close losses. Cincinnati, West Virginia, 2 non-conference games. And we've had a lot of discussion about this. What's the upside to Pitt to schedule those 2 games anymore? And part of the reason I ask about it, particularly like you look at Duke's schedule, it's crazy. I mean, they have one of the toughest schedules in the conference, and they've got Notre Dame on top of it. I mean, we could just table how Notre Dame hurts the conference, but just putting that aside for now, if you're Pitt going forward, are you going to keep scheduling those non-conference games? Or are you going to say, look, if I get a bad stretch of conference opponents, we got to have cupcakes on the schedule?
No, they're going to keep doing this. First things first. I mean, Pitt, West Virginia, this is a rivalry that no one wanted to see go away. And it's the biggest thing that Pitt has to offer right now, I think. And it's just, you look at it the last time it was played in Pittsburgh, the season opener in 2022, it's the highest attended sporting event in the history of the city. And this is a city that hosts quite a lot of sporting events. So it's a big time game, and they're going to keep playing that. That's the intention of both programs. And I get why. That's what they want. That is what college football is all about. I see the worry of, hey, we need cupcake wins here because our conference schedule is going to be hard. But overall, I mean, I don't know. I don't see West Virginia as a tremendous challenge. And Pat Narduzzi wants those challenges. He wants his team to have a tough non-conference schedule. You look at the opponents they played in the non-conference throughout his time here. It's Oklahoma State, Tennessee. They started home and home with Wisconsin here soon. This is just what the guy wants. And Cincinnati's another part of it. It's another old Big East rivalry. And so, yeah, I think they're going to err with tradition. This is a program also, man. You look in a city like Pittsburgh, you're competing with professional sports for eyeballs. So you got to do what you can to draw up interest, to sell tickets, to create an atmosphere that you can bring recruits to and say, hey, you should come play in this. And people are going to show up to rivalry games early in the year more than they would if Pitt's playing Youngstown State or Akron or somebody. So that's, I think, their mentality, and I don't necessarily disagree with it. I respect it. Is it the best way to get to 10 wins? Definitely not. But I think when you're on the flip side, I think if you can win those games, it gives you momentum heading into the conference season, where if you're a team like the Pitt that's typically ranked anywhere between 30 and 40 to start the year, you win those non-conference games, you win just one conference game, you're in the rankings, you're in the mix. And that's how they go about it.
And I completely understand that rationale. I've been thinking about this a lot as I've looked at kind of the non-conference schedule for teams, though. And when you get into this really unbalanced schedule where, and we can go through Duke's run of success under the prior regime, a lot of that coincided with not having to play Clemson and Florida State, right? Mm-hmm. And those guys are back on the schedule. It's going to be tough for the Blue Devils going forward. That makes you really think about, okay, what am I going to do for my non-conference schedule? Because, and this was a discussion that everybody who's close to the Blue Devils that I talked to has had, that this team may, to some extent, be better than last year's team,
mm-hmm.
but they had to play Notre Dame. They had to open against Clemson. You throw Florida State on top of that. I mean, and Louisville's ranked and doing real well. Who's had kind of the opposite schedule for conference schedule wise. If you're looking at football, your football team, and you're the athletic director, and you're thinking to yourself, this is the money making sport at my school, and it's what generates money for the NCAA. How do we get it to where we can at least get to 6 wins and go to a bowl game no matter what? I mean, that's going to be a real challenge as we see these mega conferences, and we are completely divorced from any sort of sensible scheduling.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that moving forward, especially with the 12-team playoff now, where if you just have one loss and you're a Power 5 team, you're probably getting in. Why would you want to risk one of those losses coming in week 2 and just being like, okay, well, now we have to be perfect for the rest of the year? I get that. I just think that for some schools, especially like a program like a guy led by a guy like Narduzzi, say what you want about him, Pat always wants to smoke. He's not scared of anybody. Even people that routinely beat him, he will talk smack on. And you kind of have to admire that. He doesn't back down from anything, and that's just how they're going to go about it. But yeah, logically, you don't go this route. You schedule cupcakes. Maybe you have that one rivalry game. In this case, it would be Pitt, West Virginia. And then the rest of it's FCS or MAC schools. And you get ready for what's going to be a conference gauntlet. But I think everyone's going to have their different. I think every program has its different ceiling for one. Like Pitt, I don't think goes in just trying to win 6 games. It's more just like, hey, what can we do to get us in a spot to get in this playoff? And there are years where just going one loss in the ACC might not be enough. So that's why you have to kind of pad your non-conference. I don't know. It's a tricky thing that I don't know if there's a right answer either way.
No, I agree with you. I think it's a challenging thing, and it's hard to make sense of. And speaking of things that are challenging and hard to make sense of, let's talk about this matchup that we've got coming up. I'll give you my perspective on where the Blue Devils are. We started the season Labor Day night game, Clemson at Durham. I was there. It was great. Wonderful atmosphere. I was at the Notre Dame game. Equally great. Wonderful atmosphere. NC State, same thing. Since the NC State game, and a lot of this is injuries. We're on our third quarterback who's a true freshman, and people online were interacting with me. We're saying, the defense is the problem, and Elko has been critical of the performance of the defense. I just want to say I don't care how good your defense is, unless you are the the 2000 Ravens.
Yeah.
And you are not going to win no matter how good of a defense you are or how well you scheme if you are down to your third string quarterback. That is not criticizing Grayson Loftus. It's just saying, look at evidence and history and facts and how things have played out. I get it. I will say this, though, to the people who are critical of the defense, and I know maybe we can do more, score more. The last 2 games that have been losses, it's a total of 5 points. And if you go back and watch the North Carolina game, I mean, any other quarterback not named Drake May would have been sacked about 8 times. He just made plays that no other quarterback can make right now in the ACC. The Virginia game, was what it was. Here is kind of where I'm coming in, and you can fill in more of the Pitt side, but as the Blue Devil side, go back and look at our box scores. The offense is not coming alive till quarter 4. 22 points against the Tar Heels, and then against UVA, 14 points in the fourth quarter. It was not enough. So, let's be fair and say it's hard for a defense to dominate the entire game and just wait till your offense takes it over in the fourth quarter. Those are some challenges the Blue Devils have. You talked about the challenges that Pitt has, that it's dealing with right now. Talk to us maybe a little bit about matchups. How are these 2 teams going to match up? What are you looking for in particular?
Well, first things first, sounds like your offense is a lot like the other Pittsburgh offense in town, the Steelers, who don't score any points until the fourth quarter, unless they play the Cleveland Browns like they did on Sunday and just don't score points in general. But matchup wise, it's just weird to me. Like these two teams seem pretty similar in a lot of ways, where, like you said, their defenses kind of carry the load, and at least in Pitt's case, what you brought up is, I think, the marquee point of this matchup is Duke gets better offensively as the game goes on. Pitt's defense kind of fades away in the fourth quarter at times, simply because it's always on the field. Pitt's offense will turn the ball over. It will go 3 and out. And it gets to a point where the defense is just like, we can't do this all by ourselves. And the house kind of comes caving in. Now, on the flip side, Pitt is also very good at second half adjustments. So if you get a good first half on the Panthers, probably not going to get a good second half. But if it's one of those games where Pitt, and it's pretty much been every game on the road, where Pitt is just relying on its defense to keep it in the game, keep it hanging around, eventually the water dam breaks. And that might be the case Saturday, where it's going to be a close game until the end. And then eventually Pitt's own offensive errors are going to result in the defense not being able to maintain its fast pace. I will say that something that Pitt might have to its advantage is quarterback play. It's also on its third quarterback this year, although it could be argued he probably should have been the starting quarterback, Nate Yarnell. He's just a guy who, again, he's kind of exactly what Narduzzi wants. He's a game manager, but he will not turn the football over. And he will make smart decisions. And because you actually have to play him honest, he opens up the run game as well. So those are some key points I would present just as far as the matchup looks.
I was talking to some guys online, and we were messaging back and forth. Duke's defensive line hasn't been as explosive of late, and I wonder if it's just going back to really since the 4th and 16 play against Notre Dame, when all the injuries started to become really, really problematic. It's just been so much pressure put on them. I mean, you've probably seen a lot of that. Opposing offenses smell blood in the water. Like, hey, you're down to your third string quarterback. We're going to get riskier. We're going to attack you more. We're going to be much more aggressive. Part of me wonders if that's going on. I mean, I don't have the game film, so I can't sit back and watch it the way that I would need to really comment on it as intelligently. I will say, though, since Louisville, there's been a lot more, starting in the Louisville game, there's been a lot more pressing. There's been a lot more, I don't want to say panic, but just not as disciplined, organized Roman legion fighting style of play from the defenses we're used to. But I also think, look, I mean, I'm going to pull up the scores from the games. And again, I think Loftus has played really well. I think he's got a bright future, but the defense has done enough to keep us in each game. 24-21 against Wake Forest, 45-47 against North Carolina, official assisted. I think we'll all agree with that. We'll say, and then 27-30 against UVA. I mean, there's chances there. And I think if the offense plays a little bit more complementary with some of the specific play calling, it can make a difference. But again, it's really, really hard to win when you're playing your third quarterback, unless you're at where, I mean, I can't even think of a school that could do that without
Ohio State won a national championship with a third quarterback. But yeah, that's why it was such a crazy story. And I can name that off the top of my head because it never happens.
Exactly. And I mean, it's hard to do, but I think, and I wonder if you feel the same way watching Pitt, if the defense just feels more pressure to be perfect and it starts to become an issue.
Oh, for sure. And I think it explains earlier in the season, there were a lot of pass interferences, holdings on the secondary, roughing the passers. And I think it was a product of what you just said. They're trying to do too much. They feel like they can't allow a 5-yard catch, or they have to do whatever they can to get to the quarterback. And after he throws the ball, they fall on him, and there's 15 free ones. That's just kind of how it's been. Yeah, I think the defense has been trying too hard at times. I think it's been better in recent weeks. But overall, yeah, I still do think that the offense's inability to score points has made the defense worse. And I think that that can be said for really any team that isn't scoring points.
Talk to us a little bit about Pitt's secondary, because one thing Duke fans will all agree on is that the receiving core has not been able to replace Eli Pankel since he went out. And I can't remember exactly when preseason it became apparent he was not going to play. But the wide receivers haven't been as dynamic. I'm not sure if Jalen Calhoun, the extent of the injury that he suffered yet. And of course, you don't really get great injury reports yet in the ACC. So if you can, tell us a little bit about what we should expect from the Pitt secondary.
Aggressive or aggression. I mean, it's headlined by 3 corners that are 2 6th-year seniors, and then one is a redshirt senior. These are guys that have played a lot of football. They're confident. They can make plays. MJ Devonshire is a player that will be in the NFL one day. Marquez Williams is a 4-year starter for Pitt, and if he had better size, he would definitely be a lock for the NFL. I could still see him catching on to a roster. And AJ Woods is a guy you'll see him used in the nickel package. They bring him on blitzes occasionally off the edge. He's also really good at covering in the slot. He can play, in a boundary or just, cover a flat. They got a lot of talent at quarter, and they got a lot of experience at corner. Safety, they have Donovan McMillan. He's got 99 tackles. That's 3rd in the ACC. He's going to be someone that's really used to stop the run. He's probably going to be the most important player on Pitt's defense in a matchup like they have against Duke, where there's going to be a lot of running, not a lot of throws down the field. And then the other 2 safeties, McMillan, PJ O'Brien and Javon McIntyre, they're going to probably rotate at the free safety spot, and they're both kind of ball hawks. O'Brien has 3 interceptions this year. I believe 2 of those 3 came in the red zone, so he can make some big plays when needed. And McIntyre is kind of like a hybrid safety. He could play both spots. Probably has the highest upside out of all 3 of them if you're talking like long-term, next level. But there's certainly talent there. There's more experience at corner. There's probably more overall talent at safety, but I would say secondary is probably the best area of this defense.
All right, let's transition from the matchups to the actual game and the game prediction itself. Again, we started as Blue Devil fans loving the late games, loving the evening games, and now we're back to the old 12 o'clock time slot, which I'm sure Pitt does not want to be there either, but that's where we are. So here it is. You got Pitt, you got Duke, Wallace Wade, Saturday after Thanksgiving. Who do you think is going to win and why?
First off, I got to tell you, actually, all Pitt fans are happy about a noon kickoff. This is the only noon kick that Pitt's had all season long. And as a beat writer, it's been kind of dreadful to cover all these night games and meet deadline. However, I will say I wish they had a 3:30 kick, because I'm flying in Saturday morning from New York City, where I'll be covering a basketball tournament. So we got to hope that JFK doesn't have any delays. Otherwise, the Post-Gazette is going to be missing for the start of the game, because I'm scheduled to land at 10 a.m. in Durham on Saturday morning. So we're going to be cutting it close, but we'll make it work. But as far as my game prediction goes, I'll say Duke wins 24-21. Something that stands out to me in this matchup, the Blue Devils are 5-1 on their home field this year. Pitt is 0-5 on the road. That's as simple as that. Duke's got guys coming out for senior night. They're going to be playing motivated. I think there are a lot of Pitt guys on this team who are just ready for this season to be over. And the trip to Durham at noon, if Duke was still ranked and they could knock them out of maybe an ACC title spot or something along those lines, there'd be a lot more to play for. And Narduzzi does a great job of motivating his guys, but I think everyone's ready for this season to be over. I think there are a lot of coaches on this staff that know that this is probably their last game they're going to coach at Pitt. And I think the Blue Devils want to get a 7th win, finish 6-1 on their home field, and get a better bowl bid. I think Duke just has more to play for, and that's why they win the football game. So would I say 24-21?
Yep.
All right.
That's what you took. I was looking at what you said was interesting because the win against BC was at home for Pitt. And I wonder, based on what you just said, how important it was that it was a home game. And if it had been a road game, maybe it's a little different. All right. So I'm at full disclosure. Until I heard what you just said, I was going to take Pitt to win by a score of 24-20. I'm going to reverse that now based on what you just said, and I'm going to take Duke to win 24-20, and the football gods, the curse will have been lifted apparently, and Duke will finally be able to beat. You're laughing, but I mean, look at Rivals or Winspedia or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
I mean, gee, good God Almighty, it's just constant. I mean, death, taxes, and Pitt beating the Blue Devils in football. I mean, all right. Okay. 2 more predictions. We're going to check in on Richlandia. We're going to listen to Dad's voicemail now.
Well, hello again, everybody. Ben's dad here calling from Richlandia, and I will try to keep it positive as Ben always warns us when we call in. Quick look at Pitt. They're averaging just over 20 points a game, but they're giving up 27 a game. They're only rushing for 107 yards a game, and they're giving up about 158 on the ground. Their completion percentage is a little over 50%, and they average 211 yards per game through the air, and they've thrown 11 picks. Opponents have completed about 63% of their passes, averaging 208 yards per game, and have thrown 9 picks. Pitt has fumbled 14 times, losing 9. The opposition 13 times, losing 6. They average almost 62 yards a game in penalties. The punter's average is 42.7. I'm not sure if that's the net or not. Had difficulty navigating that on their stat site. They have 31 sacks and have given up 19. They're 9 of 14 on field goals attempted and 20 of 22 in the red zone with 15 touchdowns. Opponents in the red zone are 28 out of 38 with 23 touchdowns. Couldn't find their third down success rate. On fourth down, they've made it 53% of the time. The opponent's 46%. Hammond and Flemister are their leading rushers with 526 and 349 yards respectively. VLU has taken over at quarterback and has 7 TDs but 8 picks. Kenny Johnson has 1 kickoff return. I believe it was a 100-yard touchdown return. Mumfield and Means are their leading receivers with 5 touchdowns each. McMillan and McIntyre are the leading tacklers with 99 and 76 total tackles respectively. Hayes and Simon have the most tackles for loss, and Simon is their sack leader with 5. For what it's worth, common opponents, they lost to North Carolina 41-24, lost to Wake Forest 21-17, lost to Notre Dame 58-7. FSU, they lost 24-7, but they did beat Louisville 38-21, a team that we were unable to score on. It's been a little frustrating here lately. It's not the same team, obviously, that we saw in the first 6 weeks or so of the season. Obviously, injuries have taken a toll. But we've also had a rough time with the Zebras. We had a holding call go against Virginia up in Charlottesville on Saturday in the end zone, which was supposed to award us a safety, in which case, if that had taken place, aside from what may or may not have happened after we received the ball from kickoff from their 20, when we scored that last touchdown, we would have been within a 2-point conversion of tying that football game. And of course, we missed a field goal too, which didn't help the case. But the reality was, it just doesn't seem to be the same level of energy that we've had. I apologize for missing out on my 10-2 prediction. This should have been a special. I did preface that preseason prediction, of course, with a comment about injuries. And boy, talk about being prophetic there. But we also now have some issues going on about Elko's name being tossed around as a possible replacement for some other jobs. Every place from Michigan State to Texas A&M. And, don't know what our situation is there, but we certainly need to do some things differently on offense. We've become way too predictable. I think we ran right up the middle out of the shotgun on 3rd and 1 3 times. And someone once said the definition of stupidity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Also, the blitz package just seemed to have disappeared, and the 3-man rush is just not cutting it. And, the coaching staff needs to do some things differently. We still have a chance. Of course, we are bowl eligible, and we have a chance to win 8. And I think before all this started, if everybody had known we could maybe go 8-5 with what was perceived to be a much more difficult schedule, they'd be satisfied. But frankly, I'm disappointed. Love you, Ben. This has been a whole lot of fun. Can't wait for a special bowl edition. Hopefully we'll be live together. Hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And love you guys. Hope you're all feeling better. And let's go, Duke.
Dad, you did go 10-2. We're not there. I will note for the record that I had the Blue Devils somewhere around 7 wins this season. So I hope that they will beat Pitt, and I'll be right. Now we have one more, and those of you, I'm going to read a message that I got. Those of you who listen know that we have had former players make several picks this season. We have one with Pennsylvania roots who's coming in with a pick. We're going back a long, not too long of a ways. We're going back to the mid to late 90s. My good friend Ben Ertlejack, former Blue Devil wide receiver and return guy, sent me this message. It has been a very up and down season. Some very exciting games where the team has played very well. Some very disappointing games where the team has played very poorly. Some great wins and some absolutely heartbreaking losses. Pitt is a similar team to Virginia. Bad record, but very capable. They have plenty of talent to win. However, our Duke team has more to play for. Dwayne Carter, Jordan Waters, Jalen Calhoun, Graham Barton, Nicky Dalmolin, and others will be determined to end the regular season and their Duke careers with a win at Wallace Wade. Ben has taken Duke by a score of 24-21. So, Ben, thank you for doing that, and I'm glad that you and I have stayed in touch since the interview that we did, God, a long time ago now, it seems like, but it's been great to stay in touch with you. And thank you for making this guest pick. And I think you're going to be at the game, and if so, I hope you enjoy it. I'm not going to be at the game. I'm going to try to get down to see some family this weekend, schedule permitting. But Noah, I doubt you listen to my podcast regularly. It's probably not too much of what you need to cover your teams, other than maybe talking about Matt Canada for the Steelers, which is fine if that's what you want to do. But I give everybody who comes on here an open mic to talk about whatever they want to talk about. So you've got an open mic. You've answered plenty of my questions, so the floor is yours.
I just want to talk about something near and dear to my heart, which is Division III football. I am a proud alum of the University of Mount Union. If you don't know what Mount Union football is all about, I highly encourage you to give it a Google. 26 appearances in the Division III national championship game since 1993. 13 of those resulted in national championships. Names like Pierre Garcon, Nick Sirianni, Dom Capers, Cecil Shorts, just a couple of them. You might recognize those are all Purple Raiders. We won our first playoff game as the 1 seed in the Division III postseason, and we are on to the round of 16, where we will hopefully win. It's been a long time. It's been since 2017, our last national title. So our Purple Raiders got to get back on top.
A long time.
Okay. It is for listen. This senior class in 2022 was the first senior class since my dad graduated that went through for 4 years and didn't win a national championship. So it's been a while.
Okay. Now remind me, I'm trying to remember, the championship has been regularly played. The D3 football championship has been regularly played in Salem, Virginia. That's right.
Salem, Virginia. Yes.
So I'm in Roanoke.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I am right next to. When you said that team, I said, "Oh my gosh, That's the football team. That's right. So I have not made it to the Stag Bowl. Now that my kids are a little bit older and they're not commandeering all my Saturdays, I might be able to start going there to see those. Now, but remind me though, does your school is it just football that they dominate in, or is there another team? The reason that I asked that is when I was in law school at Washington and Lee at W&L University School of Law. In the Old Dominion Athletic Conference, that's a D3 program, and I feel like I encountered your team in a couple other instances.
So track, Mount Union's a powerhouse in track, and then in basketball, it just lost the national championship on a buzzer beater to Christopher Newport this past year in March Madness. So it's been steadily rising in basketball. It's number 5 in the country now. Honestly, it's a sports school. It's pretty good at every sport. It's just a national power really in football. And yeah, if you're from Roanoke, you should definitely know Mount Union and Wisconsin Whitewater played in the national championship game, I think 8 years in a row in the 2000s, from like 2006 to 2014 or something like that. So it was, that's what I use my platform for. So
I'm going to have to go back and see if I can check with the old sports information director at W&L, because I feel like I encountered that team. So when I was in law school, I did public address work to make, because, law students are incurring a lot of debt and not making a lot of money at the time. So I would do stuff like that to make some money. And my sports were field hockey, which I still don't understand, women's soccer, did a little bit of baseball, but not that much, and some basketball. Didn't do football or a couple or a lot of the men's sports, but I think I'm confident I ran across your alma mater somewhere else. I'll try to figure out where that was. But that's great that you are part of a wonderful football program there. And look, we can talk a lot as fans about Blue Devil fans, how this season played out. I just want to close on this. This is a really, really tough schedule. And for those of you who listen to the podcast, one thing you will know is injuries hit places like Duke harder than they do a lot of other schools.
Yep.
There was a reason I was a little bit more tempered in my view on how Duke can do. And I don't think that we should get, as fans, it's hard not to when you lose to your biggest rival and then you lose a close one to UVA. I get that. But we should be real pleased with the job that's being done by Coach Elko and his staff. It is very hard to replace guys in Durham. It's much harder there than it is some other places. This was always going to be a tough job. And to get this team bowling with all the injuries that it's had to deal with throughout the entire season, particularly the last half, we shouldn't lose sight of what a great accomplishment that is. And I know people are talking about, well, what about the interview with Michigan State? Look, I don't see any scenario where he ends up at Michigan State. I don't think he's seriously talking to him. I know the players are not going to get distracted by that. Don't worry about that. Let's just be glad that even with everything that we've had to deal with this year, this team is at least going bowling and has a chance to get to 7 wins. Let's hope it happens, and let's hope that no matter what occurs, Noah gets to the game on time and has a fantastic football game to write about. That's what we want, and of course, then I'll talk about how the Blue Devils won. So we'll get to that. And guys, keep listening to the podcast. I'm trying to line up a few off-season things, get that going. Also, I mentioned this online. I reached out to a professor coming on, talk a little Roman history. We'll see. You guys know I'm into that. Follow us on our website, bullcitycoordinators.com. Check us out on Twitter at Duke FB Coverage. We are everywhere you get your podcasts. And as always, go Duke.